What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Fellow Show. I am your host, theFellowKGB. You can follow me on Twitter at theFellowKGB. And it is Wednesday, September 2nd. We got a lot of stuff going on, people preparing for fantasy drafts this Labor Day weekend. I've got my most important drafts this weekend. So tonight I'm just going to be reviewing my projection document and just kind of going through my numbers and talking about just basically just players that I like. And really, when I'm constructing my fantasy football team, you really can't think about things too much. I think you just got to keep collecting good players every time you're up. And you basically are at your draft, you're trying to just avoid the bad pick. So I think for the most part, we're just going to be looking at my projection document, which I think you can access on Patreon if you go to thefantasyfellowship.com if you want to check that out. It's only $10. But for now, we are just going to kind of walk our way down through the ADP list, and we'll see how many players we can get through. I think I'm going to go live for about an hour. So we'll just kind of keep on talking here. There's really no question with the first pick. It should be Christian McCaffrey. I think no one's going to hesitate on that one. And then really it's the next couple picks here. So if I just go ahead and go to my running backs tab, and when I talk about players, I'm pretty much talking about them in a PPR format. I think that's the majority of the leagues that people are playing in. So for me, there's really no question who the top three picks should be. You could argue Barkley, Elliott, number 2 or 3. But for the most part, if you get a top 3 pick, you're taking one of these running backs. And then once you get the number 4 pick, I think that's when you get a couple question marks and you kind of get to decide what you want to do. So at the moment right now, I have Alvin Kamara and Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook as RBs 4, 5, and 6. You can easily pick one of these guys at the 4, 5, or 6 pick. I have really no question with any of them besides, the contract situation. But Kamara was back at practice today. I think they're going to sign Dalvin Cook. From what I heard from Paul Charchian on one of the episodes of On the Couch today with Sigmund Bloom, he said that it's kind of like the agent is holding the pen here. Dalvin Cook wants to sign. He wants to play this year. So I'm going to bank on something getting done for Kamara and Cook. But if you do hold the 4 spot, I'm not going to argue with you if you want to just take Derrick Henry, who's already signed his big deal. He's kind of locked in. So I am totally okay if you want to take Derrick Henry there. And then at basically the 5 and the 6 spot, that's when you start to think about, these 3 running backs and then maybe a receiver like Michael Thomas. So if you're in a full PPR league, Michael Thomas, of course, if I filter by so I have a flex tab here, and if I filter by flex, I got Michael Thomas as being one of the top running backs here that you can draft. Let me just edit that real quick there. So Michael Thomas is up here at 3rd best overall. I have Devontae at 5 best overall. These are really the only 2 receivers that I feel the most confident about. I think you could argue if you're looking for a receiver at the end of the 1st round, you could be looking at Tyreek Hill or Julio Jones. Don't let Devontae Adams fall too far. He's too good of a receiver and he has too good of a connection to let him slip. So I'm really big into Michael Thomas and Devontae Adams into the 1st. And you can talk me into Tyreek and Julio Jones at the end of the 1st, but you just got to make sure you wrap around probably with a running back. So basically the whole 1st and 2nd round the whole question is running backs and how you want to devise your draft. So for me, there's a clear top 6. I think Kamara and Cook are going to be okay with contract situations. So hopefully those get resolved before the weekend. If not, maybe you look towards a Michael Thomas or Devontae Adams. But after those top 6, I'm looking at this huge tier of running backs from Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, Josh Jacobs, James Conner, Clyde Edwards, Joe Mixon, Miles Sanders, Kenyon Drake. These are my preferred running backs to select in the 2nd round. And to be honest, all of these guys look best as your RB2. So if you get a top 5 or 6 pick and you end up with one of the guys that I mentioned above, I'm trying as hard as I can to get one of these backs to fall to me in the 2nd round. And I think that's where their value is the best. If you're sitting at pick 9, 10, 11, 12, I think that's where you kind of have to just choose, okay, which one do I feel most confident about? Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's locked into a really good offense. He's going to be catching passes, and he's going to be probably scoring more than 10, double-digit touchdowns. So I like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And then you can turn around and pair him with another one of these running backs that I have highlighted here. So if you're sitting at the back end of the 1st round, I think I'm trying to come away with 2 of these running backs, and you kind of just have to do a preference thing and feel for yourself at who is the best pick that you want there. But we'll kind of go ahead here and just keep kind of filtering through flex. The thing about Aaron Jones, guys, is he came out to my RB8 in my projection rankings. And when I do these projections, I don't think about them, as my running backs, and then I'll do them all by running back. I do them by team. And when I was doing the Packers, I actually downgraded Aaron Jones in every statistical category, and he still came out to my I guess my 8th best player. It looks like he's my RB7. So I still think he's got upside as a true running back 1. And if you can get him as your RB2, if you're sitting at the 12-13 pick, you want to take a guy like Nick Chubb and Aaron Jones. I think I'm totally on board with that. That kind of balances, Chubb being a really good runner and Aaron Jones being a really good pass catcher. So I think that's pretty much how I like to navigate it. But if you're not sold on any of these running backs, you could sneak in a Tyreek Hill or Julio Jones at the back end of the first. But I think people are really going to start pivoting towards those running backs at the end of the first, beginning of the second. And basically when all these running backs are gone, so say I'm sitting at like the 20th pick or something, and you can still grab, a Sanders, a Drake. I mean, basically James Conner, I'm telling you should be taking James Conner at the end of the second. I think I'm higher on him than a little bit more than the other people that are telling people to, make picks. But I'm a huge fan of James Conner, and I think it's really easy to devise a plan where you're just going to draft Benny Snell with him and kind of just get the handcuff. But if James Conner plays a full 16 games, he's a top 10 back. So I have him at a back 11. He's actually ranked higher than some of the other running backs that you wouldn't think of. So you could probably get him down here. Say you have a top, 2 or 3 pick, you could probably get James Conner somewhere in this range from 21 to 28. So I think that's a really good option. But after this big tier of running backs, I think you kind of have to start looking towards the tight ends and Travis Kelce and George Kittle, because those two, those guys are the clear cut number 1 and 2 options at tight end. There's kind of a big drop off, I think, from Kelce and Kittle. But if you want to wait for Ertz, I get that too. But as far as the second round picks go, I think Travis Kelce and George Kittle are as safe as they come. Second round, you're really trying to get a running back. That's where you start to think about a guy like Travis Kelce here, he's my 22nd best flex player. I think George Kittle's down a little bit. But he's not far off of Travis Kelce by much, maybe 1 or 2 points per game. So Kelce and Kittle are end of the second rounds for me. I'm trying to grab all those running backs that we talked about. And then once you get towards the very end of the second round, I think that's where you start thinking about some of these receivers like Chris Godwin, maybe DJ Moore, Kenny Galladay's a decent second round pick at the end there. And then some of these guys you're going to be able to get starting into the third round. And I think the third round of all the rounds, that's probably going to be my number 1 wide receiver round, where say you started with the running backs, Clyde Edwards, and then you say you got Aaron Jones. You start with your 2 running backs, you're going to probably pivot, and you're going to look for some of these receivers here, whether that is Mike Evans, Adam Thielen, DJ Moore. I think that's the round where you can really grab any of these guys, and I feel really confident about it. And if any of these guys fall to the 4th, you just keep taking them. And as far as the running backs go, I think there's kind of a drop-off after these top 15 running backs. Ronald Jones, Le'Veon Bell, Chris Carson, Raheem Mostert, Melvin Gordon, Jonathan Taylor, Todd Gurley, Cam Akers. I have all these guys as RB2s, but I'm not really buying these guys over the receivers here that we're talking about in the 3rd and 4th round. And I'm probably going to keep on drafting receivers until, this whole tier is gone. Basically, I think Chris Godwin's a lock for round 2, but anywhere from DJ Moore all the way down to DK Metcalf, I'm taking these receivers in the 3rd and 4th round. So in the 3rd round, if you can come away with a Mike Evans and then you come back with a McLaurin or Robert Woods or even AJ Brown, I think that's kind of the way to go. So I'm going to strongly recommend drafting wide receivers in the 3rd and 4th round. If you can get a guy like DK Metcalf in the 5th round, I think that's great value. But after these guys are pretty much gone, that's where I start digging back towards running back. I'm probably not taking Zach Ertz over any of these receivers, but I could see myself, if Zach Ertz falls to the end of the 4th round, I think he's got pretty good value. And to be honest, he's kind of making Kelce and Kittle expendable, because these guys are such a high pick. And you see here, I have Zach Ertz only 10 points behind George Kittle. So I think I'm gonna recommend, if you're interested in Kittle or Kelce, I think I'm going to recommend waiting for Zach Ertz at the end of the 4th, or you just kind of monitor where he's going. But there's a clear drop-off in the top 3 to Mark Andrews for me. I think Mark Andrews might be a little inconsistent, but on Zach Ertz is, he's going to get a lot of catches, a lot of targets. He's going to be the main focal point in that passing offense. So that's kind of my tight end room. I could argue, you could convince me to take Mark Andrews in the 5th, but if I don't get one of these guys, that's where I really like to wait on tight ends. So we'll talk about tight ends later. But for now, I think you kind of get the idea where I'm looking at. I really like all these receivers. If you can get Metcalf at the beginning of the 5th, end of the 4th, I think that's kind of the end of a tier. I'll even include Odell Beckham. I think Odell Beckham could have a really nice year. If you think about the Browns offense kind of being like the Minnesota Vikings offense with Stefanski there, I think he could be – you can have him as a wide receiver too, but he's got upside of a wide receiver 1. The separation from a guy like Odell Beckham to, let's see here, it's really only like 15, 16 points up until, my wide receiver 13. So that's literally 1 point per game. So I really like these guys in this round. Michael Gallup, Cortland Sutton. These are some of my favorite picks to make in the 6th round even. So I'll highlight Gallup, Sutton, Keenan Allen I'm interested in. Tyler Boyd's one of my favorite picks. Maybe Marquise Brown. These are guys that I would continue taking into the 6th round. And then as far as running backs that stick out to me in the 4th, 5th, 6th round, I might take a guy like Todd Gurley. I have him lower here just because I'm factoring in a little bit of injury risk. But a guy like Todd Gurley, his schedule is really, really nice to start the season. I'm really big into Raheem Mostert in the 5th or 6th round. I think I would be comfortable kind of, seeing if I like the receivers there versus Mostert. And I really like Ronald Jones. But what's annoying to me right now is we just saw some news about Leonard Fournette possibly being signed by Tampa Bay. So Mike Garofalo is reporting it. Albert Breer is reporting it. So the quote is, they have emerged as a serious suitor for Leonard Fournette. So we'll see about that. I know the Patriots are really interesting. They reached out to Fournette already. So we got to see where Fournette lands. So if you're drafting tonight or tomorrow, you have to be conscious of the situation that Ronald Jones, as good as he has been in camp, and as nice of quotes that Bruce Arians has said, they might be adding Leonard Fournette, who I think would be kind of the main pass-catching back there. But I still think Ronald Jones is in for carries. I still think he's got RB2 upside this year. He was RB25 last year. So if they sign Fournette, I'm probably going to be drafting Jones if he falls a good amount of deal to like the 6th, 7th, maybe even falls to the 8th round. Who knows what happens with his ADP. But yeah, as far as running backs, I told you guys all the ones that I like. Basically the top 15, if I can get 2 of these top 15 names here that I have highlighted, I love that. And then I'm kind of taking my shots on Jones, hopefully no Fournette. I love Raheem Mostert's value. Jonathan Taylor's a guy that I'm keeping my eye on. Todd Gurley. And I guess even Mark Ingram and David Johnson, if they fall far enough. Those are kind of the names that I'm looking at. And then as far as quarterbacks, we didn't really talk about where these guys fall into the whole mix. I play in a lot of super flex leagues. If you play, like a standard quarterback league, I think Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, you probably have to spend a late 2nd, early 3rd round pick on these guys. I find myself in a super flex league, I find myself wanting to pay up for them just so you can lock in the guy and then grab another one later. But for me, the way I've been handling this is I want Dak Prescott, I want Russell Wilson, in the maybe 5th or 6th round. I think those guys have just as good a shot to finish as the quarterback one as the other ones. And you just think about the Dallas Cowboy offense with all those weapons: Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, Blake Jarwin, Ezekiel Elliott. That's going to be a passing frenzy over there. They're going to throw for 5,000 yards. I think I have Dak Prescott leading the league in yards and passing yards this year. Yep, I have Prescott, Brady, Mahomes as being the best passing offenses. Matt Ryan, Jared Goff is there too. So is Stafford. So if you go ahead and filter by passing yards, you'll kind of see who I like here. I got Joe Burrow pretty high on the list. Teddy Bridgewater's pretty high. So I like teams that are going to be throwing the ball in with good weapons, and you really can't beat the Dallas Cowboys from that aspect. So part of your draft plan should be to draft the Dallas Cowboy, whether that's you just get the whole thing with Dak or you start your draft off with Zeke. But I really think you got to strongly consider snagging one of these receivers, whether that's Cooper at the end of the 3rd or Gallup at the end of the 5th, maybe 6th round. And then definitely I think you need to consider CeeDee Lamb, because with CeeDee Lamb, he's kind of stepping into the Randall Cobb role this year. And Randall Cobb was wide receiver 42 last year. And I think I think Randall Cobb, as good as he is as a slot receiver, I think CeeDee Lamb's going to add a little bit more value to those touches. Cobb only scored 3 touchdowns this year. I think Lamb could catch upwards of 5, 6, maybe 7 touchdowns. So there's a good chance that there's 3 Cowboys within the top 36, being a wide receiver 3 or better. and then you're going to have Dak Prescott kind of leading it all. So what's really cool is if you're sitting at the end of the 5th round, like you could legit stack like Dak Prescott and Michael Gallup. But yeah, Dak Prescott, one of my favorite quarterback targets to get. I think I prefer him even over the cost at ADP for Mahomes and Lamar. So I love Dak Prescott this year. We'll just kind of talk about some of my other quarterbacks. We're going on about 15 minutes here. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Other quarterbacks that I have higher than most people, I'm going to say I love Russell Wilson in the mid-round. I love with Russell Wilson too. Like I'm also trying to stack Russell Wilson with Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf. That's who the passing offense is going to funnel through. I know it's a low volume passing offense, but man, if you can get one of those guys paired with Russell Wilson, it's probably going to be a good time. And then I got Tom Brady here at quarterback 5. I mean, Jameis Winston was quarterback 2 or 3 with this team last year. They're going to still be throwing the ball to the good receivers. So as high as I have Tom Brady, you can get him, in the 8th, 9th round of single quarterback leagues. So Tom Brady is one of my favorite targets to wait on. If I want to continue to wait, I'm looking for Tom Brady, Matt Stafford, maybe even Drew Brees. And then if you really want to wait deep, you can easily get 2 guys, whether that's Cam Newton and Ben Roethlisberger or Cam Newton and Tannehill. Like you could easily devise a plan where you just draft 2 quarterbacks late, and so you're going to stream them. But as far as mid-round quarterbacks, I think Kyler Murray might go ahead of Prescott or Wilson even in your draft. I haven't been drafting much Murray because the ADP cost is so high, and I prefer getting Tom Brady, or I'll just pay up for Dak Prescott. I'm probably not drafting Deshaun Watson this year. I'm a little bit nervous about the Houston passing offense without DeAndre Hopkins this year. We'll see. I mean, it's always been a thing where new receivers and new teams, they kind of struggle that first year. So now you're adding Brandon Cooks and you're adding Randall Cobb to this team. We have, just shortened we don't even have preseason games. We just have shortened practices and time that these receivers and their quarterbacks are together. So I'm not really interested in drafting Deshaun Watson. I think I'd rather have a guy with continuity, whether that's Matt Ryan or Josh Allen. I'm really into Matt Stafford. I think people are sleeping on how great his offense, how great his fantasy season was those first 8 games last year. Let me just pull up Matt Stafford's stats real quick because Matthew Stafford, he only played the 8 games last year, but when he was playing, he was like basically throwing multiple touchdowns in every game. I think he had, out of the 8 games, I think he had 3 or more touchdowns in 5 of them. He was on pace for 5,000 yards. So here's the stats. So 8 games, basically 2,500 yards, 19 touchdowns, and only 5 interceptions. So that's a pace of 5,000 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 10 picks. So Matt Stafford was dealing last year. And then you look at these game logs, 3 touchdowns, 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, 4, 3, 3, just wheeling and dealing the touchdowns. So it's pretty easy to get all the weapons there, whether that's Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones. TJ Hawkinson is one of my favorite tight ends to target late in drafts. They added Danny Amendola's their year 2, but they did add the young rookie receiver that everyone's kind of talking about in Quintez Cephas. So I think a lot of the continuity in the passing game excites me. You're still going to see Kerryon Johnson and DeAndre Swift battle for carries. So I've kind of been avoiding that backfield and just looking at how the Lions, what do I trust with the Lions? I trust Matt Stafford. So as far as quarterbacks play, there's really not a bad way to do it. If you like waiting, wait for Brady, wait for Stafford. Josh Allen's kind of a value. Josh Allen, Matt Ryan, those are 2 guys that I like to get. You can get Drew Brees really late. Carson Wentz is interesting. I know there's just so many injuries in Philadelphia. I think I'd rather pay up for Brees or Rodgers. I think Rodgers is like the whole offense in Green Bay. People are kind of sleeping on. It's year 2 of Matt LaFleur. I think that could be a juicy offense. You think about Devontae and Aaron Jones, like the offense is going to run through those guys. But you should see some year 3 development out of Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Alan Lazard's there. We'll see who steps up at tight end. But I just think the Green Bay offense is going to be more comfortable. They're going to be more on track. Their schedule's a little bit tougher, so they're going to probably have more games where the run script isn't as dominant. So you could see a few more shootouts, especially the games against Tampa Bay, Houston, New Orleans Saints. Those games are all early in the season. So I think the Packers could be a team that gets a lot of points and has to, fight to win their games. So that's kind of the quarterback field. If you want to wait for a quarterback, I kind of already talked about the guys, but I'm fine with basically if you're going to wait for a quarterback, you just take 2 of these guys, whether it's Jared Goff, Newton, Tannehill, Minshew, Daniel Jones, Joe Burrow. Ben Roethlisberger, Teddy Bridgewater. I think that's the tier here. I'll even say Carson Wentz in that. If I can get 2 of these quarterbacks on my team, I think that could be a winning strategy. And because you're passing on all these quarterbacks, you're going to be able to get some of these running backs here that we talked about. So to recap, I guess I kind of already talked at the beginning about the top 15 running backs I like. I keep refreshing this Leonard Fournette news because I've been a big investor in Ronald Jones this year. So I'm interested to see where Leonard Fournette signs. I don't really know how much value Leonard Fournette would have with Tampa Bay. I think Ronald Jones is kind of locked into the first and second down role. We'll see if he can be the 3 carry back. But as far as running backs that pique my interest, Ronald Jones definitely piques my interest in the 5th round, especially if Leonard Fournette's not on the Tampa Bay Bucks. Le'Veon Bell, it would take Le'Veon Bell to fall to the 5th round for me to draft him. Chris Carson, same kind of thing. He has to fall to the end of the 4th, which he's usually a mid-3rd round pick. Raheem Mostert's probably my favorite running back in the 5th or 6th round to get, just because I know 49ers, great defense. They're going to run the ball. I trust Raheem Mostert. He's just a great running back. We'll see if he can catch more passes this year. But then there's Melvin Gordon, who's kind of in a timeshare with Philip Lindsay. I don't really know if he's worth a 4th round pick. Jonathan Taylor, I like in the 4th round, but you got to be patient with Jonathan Taylor. I think Marlon Mack's going to be a little bit more peskier than people think. I think Nyheim Hines is also going to be pesky as far as the PPR standpoint, the scat back there. But Todd Gurley is kind of becoming the guy that interests me. If you waited on running back in the beginning of your drafts, I think you could legit end up with Todd Gurley as your RB1 and see what happens. So I'm just typing in Atlanta Falcons schedule real quick. They're going to open up against the Seahawks and the Cowboys, the Bears, the Packers, and the Panthers. So, yeah, the Bears are a good defense, but as far as a running defense, the Seattle Seahawks, the Cowboys, the Packers, and the Panthers, they don't really challenge too much in terms of rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. So I think Todd Gurley could have a nice start. Teams are going to be focused on Julio, Ridley, Hayden Hurst, and Russell Gage and Matt Ryan. So we'll see if Todd Gurley can, be up to the task and maybe start off the first 4 or 5 weeks as an RB1. I'm interested in him. As long as he's healthy, he's going to be playing fine. But after that, there's a lot of questions, starting with, we'll kind of make it this tier. So Cam Akers, I love Cam Akers. I liked his tape. He did some really nice things at Florida State. I'm nervous about the LA Rams running game. Their offensive line is not very good at all. So if you think, this is kind of like my overlying theme of how I think about my process and who I draft is, okay, so we talked about the Lions earlier. All right, I don't trust the running games. I trust the receiving. It's kind of the same thing here, where I like Jared Goff with his weapons, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higby, Gerald Everett. We'll see what rookie Van Jefferson can do. Maybe Josh Reynolds does something. I'd much rather invest in the passing game in LA, and I think I'm letting someone else take Cam Akers. As far as the Chicago Bears with Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery, we still really don't know when David Montgomery will be back and ready to roll. He might not even start week 1. So to me, I don't think that means Tariq Cohen's going to get more carries. I just think that maybe he's on the field a little bit more and catching a little bit more passes early on in the season. And from a PPR standpoint, he clocks in as my RB24. So he could be a guy that you leave in as your flex. Mark Ingram, and I know J.K. Dobbins is there. He's on the list here in the highlighted spot. But the Baltimore Ravens running game is probably the best running game in the league. And, Lamar Jackson's in the backfield, so defenses kind of have to play it straight up. They can't really load the boxes or anything. Otherwise, he'll just beat them deep. So Mark Ingram, especially to start the year, the first 4 or 5 weeks, we could see Mark Ingram. I know he's 31 years old, but he could be one of those guys that helps you get off to a strong start. I would expect J.K. Dobbins to kind of get a Gus Edwards type role last year, where Gus Edwards had 133 rushing attempts on the season. Maybe Dobbins gets up to 150, 160. That's like 10 carries a game. But that still means Mark Ingram's going to get upwards of 12 to 15 touches. He's got a good chance at a goal line touchdown every week. And he was their leading pass catching back. So Mark Ingram could be a cheap RB2 option for you if you wanted to wait. Same thing with David Johnson. I kind of view him as the same thing. But these guys they look like a guy like Mark Ingram and David Johnson look best as your flex player. But I think there's legit upside with David Johnson. If he looks like the David Johnson of old, he's still going to be catching passes. But it's the rushing opportunity that Houston basically they gave Carlos Hyde 240 some attempts last year. He ran for over 1,000 yards. We could see a similar, amount of touches for David Johnson. So he's interesting in the 4th or 5th round. I'm a fan of Kareem Hunt at the, as early as like the beginning of the 6th round. I think that's where I like our boy Kareem Hunt. So I'll just look here at the FF Today PPR sheets. So last year he averaged 12.7 fantasy points per game. I don't know what happened these last 2 weeks. He didn't really get a lot of catches or opportunity, but other than that, I mean, he was a steady PPR back. And you think about how the Cleveland Browns are going to operate this year. They have the new head coach, Kevin Stefanski from Minnesota, the former quarterback coach, and I think he was offensive coordinator for a little bit. But Stefanski he's going to install this heavy running game it's going to resemble what the Minnesota Vikings have done the last few years. So I know a lot of people are nervous about Nick Chubb, but here, let me just pull up. This is why I'm into the Cleveland Browns this year. So if we go ahead and type in Minnesota Vikings stats, we're going to go to Pro Football Reference stats right here. And I just want to pull up. So Stefanski was offensive coordinator last year. We'll just look at these numbers real quick. I mean, he gave Dalvin Cook 250 touches, but I mean, if you look here, Madison and Boone, these guys still combined for 150. So there's a lot of work to go between these two guys, but that's 400 carries between these three backs. So I still think Nick Chubb's probably going to be flirting with 290 some carries, maybe 300. That's going to leave almost 100 yet for Kareem Hunt. And then when you look at the passing attempts to the running back, so 63 targets, 12 and 4. So that's almost 80 targets there. I think you could see a little bit more. And then I guess they also threw a lot to Amir Abdullah. So that's about 100 targets to the running backs in Minnesota. So you could see maybe Kareem Hunt ends up with about 60 targets and Nick Chubb maybe somewhere in the 30 or 40 range. But anyways, you're looking, based on how this Minnesota Vikings offense ran last year, they have roughly 400 carries to divide up between Chubb and Hunt, and then maybe somewhere around 100 targets between the two. So again, Chubb's going to be the heavy carry guy where he gets, in the high 200s, maybe even hits 300. So that leaves about 100 for Kareem Hunt. And then Kareem Hunt's still going to probably get maybe 5 or 6 targets per game. Maybe Chubb gets, 2 or 3. So I really like both guys. I think the offense is going to be much more efficient this year, which is also kind of why I like Odell Beckham. So one of the podcasts that I was listening to earlier today, he basically described the Cleveland Browns offense as basically for Baker Mayfield, it's going to be like they're bowling, they're bumper bowling. So the offense is going to be run through the run game. He's going to be getting some wicked play action to Odell Beckham. He's going to have Jarvis Landry open in the middle. He's going to have Austin Hooper as well as a security blanket this year, but they're trying to limit the mistakes and a lot of the problems that Baker Mayfield has dealt with the last year or so, which is just going to help the running game. So I'm into the Browns right now. I'm also into, again, we talked about J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram a little bit ago. I think both guys, Mark Ingram's probably a 5th or 6th round pick, and I think J.K. Dobbins is a 7th or 8th round. But it really wouldn't surprise me if both those guys kind of finish the same, with the same numbers at the end of the year. I have Mark Ingram going for 190 carries, and I have J.K. Dobbins at 166. So we could see a situation where Dobbins just looks too good to ignore, and they end up having to give him, the 15, 16 touches a game, and then maybe Mark Ingram kind of takes the backseat role with maybe 12 carries a game or something. But again, I'm trying to put my money into really good situations. So we know Baltimore is going to be one of the best offenses in the league. We love their running game. So it's probably a good idea to invest in one of those guys if you can. So again, Browns, we love their running game. The Ravens, we love their running game and Lamar. And then basically I kind of already talked about the Lions running game where I don't really trust it. DeAndre Swift has missed practice, so he's kind of off my list right now. And as far as a rookie running back in this range, I'm probably taking J.K. Dobbins and Zach Moss. I think the easiest fade, I guess the most confident guy that I can say to do not draft this year is going to be Devin Singletary. For where he's being drafted right now, he's still being drafted in the end of the 4th, the 5th, sometimes the 6th round, but you can get Zach Moss in the 8th, 9th round, and I think they're basically going to be splitting carries. At the moment, I have Devin Singletary for 180 carries. I have Zach Moss for 171. So basically 50-50 down the middle, but I'm going to guarantee you that Zach Moss scores more touchdowns than Singletary this year. Frank Gore, basically the Frank Gore role is going to be going to Zach Moss inside the 5 or 10 yard line. That's where Zach Moss can separate himself. And I still think Zach Moss is just as good as a pass catcher and pass blocker as Singletary. So when the season starts, it might be closer to a 50-50 split. But if Zach Moss is doing more things with the ball, and if Devin Singletary fumbles once or twice, we're going to see Zach Moss slowly start to take the majority of carries and snaps in this backfield. So that's the easiest fade for me, is to fade Singletary and think about Zach Moss in the 8th. A couple other running backs that I'm willing to think about in the 8th round are going to be Phillip Lindsay. I kind of briefly mentioned Melvin Gordon. It sounds like Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay are basically walking into the Zach Moss, Devin Singletary situation where a 50-50 split. I think Mark Ingram or Melvin Gordon is the better pass catcher between the two. But again, they're still going to be sharing the backfield with the touches. And I guess that's why Melvin Gordon's a little bit higher. I don't feel comfortable taking him in the 4th or 5th round where he's going. But I mean, again, you can target Phillip Lindsay, Zach Moss, Antonio Gibson. These are kind of the high upside running backs in the 8th round that as soon as they start doing some things early in the season, they could demand more workload. And then I guess at that point, after the 8th round, you probably should have 3 or 4 running backs on your team. And after that, we're kind of just looking towards PPR scat backs and maybe some handcuffs. But some guys that stick out to me are Matt Breida. He could be a pretty good passing weapon in Miami. Duke Johnson's more of a handcuff still to David Johnson, but he's got standalone value in PPR leagues. Boston Scott's probably the guy that ends up on my bench the most, because we saw at the end of last year that Boston Scott and Miles Sanders were on the field together at the same time, and both of these guys had value. I think the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season, you saw Boston Scott end up with like 5 touchdowns. I can't remember how many touchdowns Miles Sanders had, but these guys were both top 10 backs the last 3 weeks, and they didn't bring in a big back. They had Jordan Howard last year. So they're going forward with Miles Sanders and Boston Scott atop their depth chart. And Boston Scott, his ADP is so cheap. And Miles Sanders already has an undisclosed lower leg injury. So Boston Scott, I basically have him in pencil on my bench when I walk into a draft, knowing that, especially if you're in a PPR league. Let's just pull up Boston Scott's numbers real quick. And we'll take a look here, because the Eagles, the other thing too is their offense is getting banged up right now. I really don't know how effective their offensive line will be. I think they're going to be throwing the ball a lot, but their receivers are hurt. So they have Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert. That's great. They have Deshaun Jackson until whenever something happens. But Alshon Jeffrey's going to be on PUP list. Jalen Reagor's not going to be ready for another month. And then they have just a ton of unproven depth at the receiver position. So we could be seeing, Miles Sanders with 6-7 targets week 1, and you could see, you look at the targets here for Boston Scott the last 4 weeks, 6, 7, 6, 6. And then the receptions, he's got a really good high reception rate. Like, he didn't drop a target for the first 3 games here, and then just a couple back here. But for a PPR floor, a bad game is going to be 7.9, sure. But Boston Scott's kind of got like a Tariq Cohen vibe, where if anything happens to Miles Sanders, we're going to see Boston Scott probably get, this 10-touch game here. This could be a regular stat line I see for Boston Scott, where he's going to get 10 carries, maybe 6 targets, and you'll see what happens, and a good shot at a touchdown too. So in a lot of these touchdowns here, the last game against the Giants, this was a competitive game. I don't know what happened to Miles Sanders. I think he tweaked something in the first quarter, and they wanted to rest him. But three touchdowns from the goal line, that's why his yards per carry were low. So Boston Scott's one of those names that I have to make sure he gets on my team. I'm interested in Nyheim Hines. We kind of talked about the Colts backfield a little bit ago, saying that we really don't know how the backfield is going to split up between Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack. But I do know that Nyheim Hines is going to get targets in the backfield, and if anything happens to one of the other two, I don't know if it's going to add significant value to Hines because he shouldn't be getting a lot of carries, but you can bet with a guy like Phillip Rivers, he's probably getting upwards of 50 to 60 targets, so that's kind of what I have him at right now. And he's one of those guys, kind of like the Boston Scotts, the Tariq Cohens. If you're in a pinch on a bye week, you whip out Nyheim Hines or Boston Scott for that matter, and their bad game will be 8 points, but it's a free 8 points. And then there's that opportunity where they get the 6 or 7 target game, and they end up getting you a touchdown and 20 points or something. So another guy that's on my list towards the end of the ADP is going to be Chase Edmonds. He's kind of the backup to Kenyon Drake, but I kind of view him as not really a true handcuff, but he's a main backup there that they're going to use in the offense anyways. So he's going to get a role. He's probably going to get 8 to 10 touches a game regardless, whether that's 6 or 7 carries and 2 or 3 catches. But there's going to be plays for Chase Edmonds in this offense. And if anything, I mean, Kenyon Drake's already in a walking boot. I know it's precautionary, but if anything happens to our guy Kenyon Drake, Chase Edmonds, he more than proved last year that he was ready for a big workload. Against the Giants is when he went nuts for 3 touchdowns and like 120 some yards. So I'm into Chase Edmonds, and at that point, that these are kind of the guys that I'm looking to get on my bench as my 4th or 5th back, and we'll see how that goes. But we'll kind of pivot towards receivers here. We're going on about 35 minutes, so we're going to kind of finish talking about these wide receiver 3s and 4s, and then we'll finish up with the tight ends here. So I kind of have this highlighted block here. These are the receivers that I'm really trying to get as my low end RB or wide receiver 3. If you can get them as your wide receiver 4, I think that's fantastic. These guys all can be flex receivers. But after this tier, you got a bunch of guys here that all have question marks. And we'll even go down to Emmanuel Sanders. So Deontay Johnson, he has not been practicing. He's kind of been moving down my boards. He might be a guy that slides down a little bit. But if he's ready to go week 1, he could be the strong number 2 receiver in that offense. He reminds me of Emmanuel Sanders. I think he's going to get open a lot for Ben Roethlisberger. And he had a really good rookie season. I think he was wide receiver 40, maybe 44 or something like that. And if you add Ben Roethlisberger in the mix, a healthy Juju Smith-Schuster to the mix, Deontay's going to get a lot of favorable matchups. And then Marvin Jones. Marvin Jones is one of my favorite receivers. We talked about the Matt Stafford and the Lions connection at the top. And think about this. Marvin Jones was wide receiver 29 last year, and he only had 8 games for Matt Stafford. So I feel like this is a floor ranking, and he's probably one of the safest picks in the 8th round maybe. So Marvin Jones ends up on my team a lot as maybe the first guy off my bench, or if you wanted to wait on receiver 3, Marvin Jones is a really good candidate. You got Jarvis Landry in that same neighborhood where he's going to probably be a little bit more steadier than Marvin Jones. He's going to probably have maybe 5 or 6 catches per game. But I still haven't seen a healthy Jarvis Landry practice yet, so I'm kind of watching that. But we'll see if he's ready for week 1. And then you got Stefan Diggs. I'm a little bit lower on Stefan Diggs than most people, but I do have him as a wide receiver 3. But based on where Diggs is going, I'm taking Michael Gallup. I'm probably taking Tyler Boyd. I just feel a little bit more secure about those situations. You got Julian Edelman here. He's a guy that's really interesting because you think about Cam Newton and how he's kind of been able to maneuver his offenses. I think he's going to gel pretty well with Edelman, and it's pretty safe to say that Edelman's going to lead the team in receptions and targets this year. So he feels like a safe guy at this range. T.Y. Hilton's an interesting guy. He kind of goes in the 6th or 7th range, but I don't really know if I'm trusting the passing offense with Phillip Rivers. I think I'd rather invest in the running game there in Indianapolis. AJ Green, I'm just not drafting AJ Green. Give me Tyler Boyd all day. It's much safer, PPR points anyways. And then I got a rookie receiver here crashing my top 36 as a wide receiver 3, and that is Jerry Judy. I have Judy with 69 catches, just under 900 yards and 6 touchdowns. The word out of Broncos camp is that Jerry Judy is the best at social distancing. He's getting open at will. And it sounds like Drew Lock is beginning to take note of this, because you think about what Lock did last year with Sutton and Noah Fant. He was kind of throwing the ball up to these guys a lot and maybe making them kind of have a 50-50 play where they have to make, a tough contested catch. But Jerry Judy is going to be open a lot. He can beat his man one-on-one. He's going to be kind of roaming the middle of the field. They're going to be moving him all over the field too. So Jerry Judy is a guy that I like. Cortland Sutton, but it's not going to surprise me if Jerry Judy catches more balls than Cortland Sutton this year, just because of the nature of Drew Lock. Maybe that's his first read, or that's the first guy that comes open more often. So I'm really into Jerry Judy and getting Jerry Judy on my team. Jamison Crowder's down here. He's going to lead the New York Jets in targets. I know it's the goddamn Jets, but you have to kind of just, at that point, the 8th, 9th round of the draft, I think you kind of just have to take the targets and see what happens in a PPR league. Preston Williams is wide receiver 39. Devontae Parker hasn't practiced in a week, guys. So it's looking like Preston Williams he's the number 2 there, but it might be a 1A, 1B situation. And as good as Devontae Parker was last year, we did see that he did not emerge until Preston Williams went down. So there's a legit chance that Preston Williams is the better receiver for fantasy this year. So he's a guy that I've been kind of snagging late. And then there's Sterling Shepard, who I still think is being criminally underrated in fantasy drafts. He's the wide receiver 1 for New York Giants. All the stats are there. that showed that he was the most targeted receiver. He had the most yards, and he got the most touchdowns, I think, on a per-game basis. So Sterling Shepard's one of my favorite guys to get on my bench. You could probably rely on him as your wide receiver 3 even. But then I want to talk a little bit about my other favorite rookie receiver, and that's CeeDee Lamb. I think the main takeaway of you watching this video is to draft a rookie receiver, whether it's Jerry Judy or CeeDee Lamb or both. Please try to get one of these guys. It's going to make your season more fun to watch these rookies grow. But CeeDee Lamb, man, we talked at the top about the Dallas Cowboy offense and wanting to just get a hold of it, get a piece of it. You could take Ezekiel Elliott in the first round. You could take Amari Cooper in the 3rd round. You could take Dak Prescott in, as early as the 4th, 5th, 6th round, whatever quarterback, round falls to you. And then there's Michael Gallup in the 6th round. And then there's CeeDee Lamb, who's probably going to be like an 8th, 9th. If he falls to the 10th, that's awesome. Do that. But again, I talked at the top. Randall Cobb was a slot receiver for the Cowboys last year, wide receiver 42. And CeeDee Lamb is going to be working in that same kind of role. He'll probably get a little bit more inside-outside work too. So he's going to be roaming the middle of the field, and they're going to rotate him and Cooper outside. And Randall Cobb only scored 3 touchdowns with this offense. He almost had 900 yards, which is basically the role that I gave CeeDee Lamb for projection-wise. But I gave him a little bit more touchdowns. So CeeDee Lamb, I think this offense with the Dallas Cowboys is going to be must-see TV this year. And I just want to get a piece. So if you miss on any of the earlier Cowboys at ADP, just try to get CeeDee Lamb. We'll talk about Blake Jarwin when we get to the tight ends. But CeeDee Lamb is going to be fun to watch and give you something to root for if you miss one of the early Cowboys. Brandon Cooks. I talked a little bit at the top about Deshaun Watson, how I'm a little bit nervous about the Houston passing game without DeAndre Hopkins. They're also new receivers in the mix here with Brandon Cooks and Randall Cobb, new running back and David Johnson. Not a lot of continuity here on this offense is in terms of players. But if there's one player that I could get behind, it's Brandon Cooks. Really, if you take away last year, he's been a top 15 receiver. He's been a fringe wide receiver 1. And he's got a history of going to new teams and being just fine. So Brandon Cooks could be a guy that could adapt really quickly and surprise us as a wide receiver 3+ this year. And then there's Emmanuel Sanders. The thing about Drew Brees is he's still 40 years old, but he's still one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league. He's able to get the ball out quickly. And Emmanuel Sanders, the last I checked, he's still a pretty good player even for his age at a receiver position. But Michael Thomas, man, they have not really had a receiver behind Michael Thomas the last couple of years to throw the ball to. So I'm kind of interested in Emmanuel Sanders on my bench. It's just a high passing offense. The volume there is pretty good. And I don't know. We've seen Drew Brees be able to float multiple weapons in fantasy before. So I'm kind of interested in Emmanuel Sanders. And then we'll kind of just finish up with some guys that I'm interested in as late pieces to my bench, whether that's Golden Tate. He's got a good chance at 60, 70 catches. Steven Sims, he's going to be the number 2 receiver here for Washington. He had a good connection with Dwayne Haskins. And I forget now, I didn't get a chance to talk about my favorite receivers here. I'm just going to plug in some guys real quick. These are guys that I'm not thinking about it, whether it's A.J. Brown in the 3rd, Tyler Lockett, Mike Evans, Robert Woods. These are some of my favorite receivers to take. Terry McLaurin, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf. Those guys are on my draft list. So if you get the opportunity to draft one of those guys at a good ADP cost, please do so. You're going to have a good time. And then as far as just other bench pieces that stick out, I mean, a guy like John Brown had a good connection with Josh Allen. Alan Lazard could be the number 2 in Green Bay. Christian Kirk, I think he was wide receiver 35 or something last year. And now he gets DeAndre Hopkins to kind of help cover up coverage, and loosen things up for him. So Kirk's an interesting guy if you like the Cardinals offense. Mecole Hardman might be a guy worth holding on to. Another rookie here, Laviska Shenault. But at this point, you're kind of nitpicking, and I hope you have maybe 3 or 4 guys that are already listed above. But another name, too, is the rookie receivers for Oakland, whether that's Ruggs or Bryan Edwards. But I'm a big fan of Hunter Renfrow. I think he's going to be the leading receiver in terms of receptions and targets. But that'll cover the receivers. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and or you can follow me on Twitter and ask me questions in the DMs, whatever you need. But a quick roundabout on tight ends, and we'll finish this video up here. We kind of talked about the top 4 tight ends in terms of ADP. I'm fine with Kelsey Kittle in the 2nd round, but I think I prefer waiting for Zach Ertz at the end of the 4th. I'll think about Mark Andrews in the 5th. Darren Waller becomes interesting because he's still going to be the leading. They have a lot of young rookie receivers. They have Hunter Renfrow, who I like, but Darren Waller is still probably the favorite to lead that team in targets and maybe receiving yards this year. So we'll see if he can catch more touchdowns. Jared Cook, Hunter Henry, like I'm fine with those guys, but they don't feel great. And for where you have to get them, same with Gronk, where you have to get these guys in the 7th, 8th, 9th round. I don't know if I'm comfortable doing that. Tyler Higby's a really interesting guy because he lit the world on fire last year for that little bit when he was on a massive, like he was on such a tear. Let's just look at his numbers real quick. And I don't think people are going to forget, especially Jared Goff. Jared Goff's not going to forget how clutch Tyler Higby was for him at the end of last year. And it sounds like the Rams are going to commit to a more 2 tight end heavy set. But just look at these numbers from Tyler Higby at the end of last year. I get that. I get it. Gerald Everett was out, but you can cut these numbers in half and you still have a tight end 1 here, which is crazy. But you see 4 games over 100 yards. You see an 84-yard game here, only 2 touchdowns, which is disappointing, but he just goes on a targeting rampage, which is basically when Higby's kind of stepped up. That's when Cooper Kupp's numbers kind of dipped a little bit. So I'm into the Rams passing offense, but man, Tyler Higby's got just as much upside. I don't care if it's a healthy Everett, playing just as many snaps. I think the connection that Higby formed with Jared Goff last year earned a lot of trust. So I'm into Tyler Higby, but if you want to plan for Higby, you're going to end up wanting to draft a tight end mate for him. My favorite tight end strategy is to draft 2 of them, so this year, this is my list of tight ends that I'm drafting. I'm going to get 2 of these guys, whether it's Tyler Higby, Blake Jarwin, Jonnu Smith, TJ Hawkinson, Dallas Goedert, Chris Herndon, Hayden Hurst, even Austin Hooper, Mike Gesicki, even Eric Ebron. The tight ends go so deep this year. I kind of like Noah Fant, but I think that offense might be a little bit more crowded. And then you can say Blake Jarwin's offense is crowded, but they still put up Jason Witten as a PPR tight end 11 last year. So I'm into basically this whole list. If you can get 2 of these guys, I feel really comfortable on waiting on tight end. It sounds like Eric Ebron's having a really good camp with Pittsburgh. And then basically you get 2 of those guys, you wait the first couple of weeks, someone will emerge, or you can maybe add one of these guys off the waiver wire. So I like playing it safe at tight end. But some other names I'm keeping an eye on are Irv Smith Jr., the young tight end out of Alabama, second-year player for the Vikings. Greg Olsen could have a sneaky role. We'll monitor Gerald Everett, monitor O.J. Howard. These are guys you can pick up off the waiver wire. So I think that's kind of how my strategy is going to work for the 2020 draft. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get any more videos done before the draft weekend. I have to leave for Green Bay tomorrow night. Friday, I might be able to hop on live and do some questions and things like that. So let me know if you're interested in that. But again, thank you. If you've been watching my videos or listening to the podcast, please leave a rating and review on Apple iTunes. That'd be great. But I'm just so appreciative of everyone's time and all the comments and the likes. We're up to 52 subscribers now. We're approaching 1,000 watch hours on YouTube. So it's been a really fun last couple months for me, growing this channel and interacting with people. And we're going to be doing it all season long. We're going to be live on Monday nights, Wednesday nights, talking about waiver wire and the matchups coming up for the week ahead. So lots of content coming. Thank you for hanging out. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment. Let me know who you're into, whether it's a tight end that you really love or a player you're fading. I'm down to listen to all ideas. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. Have a great draft, and we'll see you in another video. Peace.